We have Paul House with us today, and hopefully you were all in chapel today and heard him there on the first of two parts that he's of the Adams lectures, where he talked about Isaiah, and he'll continue with Isaiah tomorrow. Today was sort of the gospel in Isaiah, and if I could tell from your title, is tomorrow kind of our response to that gospel?
Yeah, servants of the gospel.
Okay. It was very, very good, and I encourage you to come back. Even if you weren't there today, come back for tomorrow and hear the conclusion to it. During this time, we're going to just have a sort of a casual conversation here, although we have another series in the chapel called Casual Conversation, so we can't borrow that, can't steal it. So we're going to call this an informal conversation. I didn't have a good play on words there. It started with an I, an informal interchange. There we go. Something like that. It's getting worse here. All right. But let me just introduce Dr. House to you quickly. He is a professor of Old Testament at Beeson Divinity School and has been at various schools over time and served as my PhD supervisor when I was at Southeastern Seminary. And I learned a lot from him. I told him, and I guess I'm speaking to those who are either in doctoral programs or you're thinking about it, to choose wisely, because, and I think I've told you this, but when I first started teaching, when I went to Indonesia, I was on the mission field, and when students would come to me with questions or things would come up in the classroom, I found myself saying sort of a WWPS. What would Paul say? What would Dr. House say? And how would Dr. House handle this kind of a question? And I found myself talking to students the way that you would talk to me, and the way that I saw you deal with others. And as you were lecturing today, I started to see myself up there a little bit, and I thought, I wonder if my students are watching. And now, if the secret is out,
that I'm imitating you?
No. So, I guess, what we were talking about at lunch, though, with Bonhoeffer and seminary education and it being personal and incarnational, I want you to know that I can see that working out in us. And I don't know if you know that or not, or if you, if it was intentional, or I don't know. But I very much learned from you, certainly in terms of knowing the Old Testament and how to think about the Old Testament. But I guess maybe more importantly was, I think I learned from you in how to relate to students and how to be gracious and critical at the same time. And those are hard things to bring together. I guess it's sort of an Exodus 34 thing, isn't it? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the craft of writing, and then about halfway through we're going to shift, and Amy Whitfield's going to help us out, and we're going to talk a little bit about, I'll say, one of Dr. House's favorite authors. I don't know if that's the right way to say that or not, but we're going to talk about Wendell Berry a little bit. And but first I wanted to just begin with writing. Dr. House, you've written a lot of books. The first book that I was introduced to you by was your book on literary criticism. And that was the book that helped me to first contact you to see about doctoral studies, was that book. But you've written monographs, you've written collections of, you've edited collections of essays, other works, you've written commentaries. And I guess my first question to you is, when you are looking at a new project, what are the habits that you have to have instilled in you to see through a writing project from beginning to end? What are the habits of the writer that can see through a long-term project?
Yeah, the habits of a writer is where I'll start. In a moment, I want to thank the library staff for the significant work you do. Thanks for doing this. It's an ancient, honorable, helpful craft, and I know it's like a lot of things under fire here and there, but I think a library is what Wallace Stegner has said. It's a commitment and a belief in the ongoing sharing of wisdom and culture. So thank you for doing it. My daughter has a degree in library science and technology, so I suffered some of your things from time to time in the past. I must say hello to Stephen Jones again. I greet him outside. Stephen is from Grant County, Indiana. The Argyles, is that right? The Madison Grant Argyles, great story behind that. His dad's told me many times. His dad was a colleague of mine at Taylor University, a longtime friend, pastor of a rural church for about 40 years while he's teaching at Taylor. Really, we ought to have more guys like Tom come and speak here, because really, what great parents. They love their son and think highly of him in his absence, so I have to say that. I was lucky in that I had a serious high school English teacher who had us read challenging literature, Camus and Sartre and stuff like that, 17-year-old Southwest Missourians. And he would have us write about it. It must have been dreadful to read it. It must have been horrible. But he would read it and mark it and would be careful with us. And then I went to college, and I had taken a national test, and I tested out of several hours of college. But the English department, which was led by Tom Paget, would not allow you to have those hours. You had to prove the hours. And so I took a Paget's writing class, added the English major to my biblical studies major, and then later did a master's in English. So I was lucky at that. I was lucky enough to teach freshman composition, if you can call that luck. They did pay me to do it. I was lucky enough to have taught international students in some of those settings. So that had its own interest. So basically, at some point, I knew I wanted to write. And Wendell Berry said at one point he wanted to become a poet, but that's way too broad. In other words, what do you want to be, a writer? Well, I'd like to be published. Well, everybody wants to be published, and these days anybody can be. So is that what you want to do? Well, I realized it was a way to extend the teaching ministry I had. It's one thing. To hold a conversation with other people writing and trying to do scholarship in that area, to contribute to that conversation. It's a chance to find something different or new that is true that you'd like to say. You've seen something or heard something that maybe has not been fleshed out and seen and heard so much before. You want to help a friend? Then there are certain things that you do. So there are different reasons. But when I wanted to be a writer, I got serious about the craft. I had been an athlete. I knew a basketball player in particular, and a race walker, which has its own rule, one of the few sports that have rules to your movement. So I thought you have to be disciplined and that sort of thing. So I stopped writing contractions sometime in the 1970s, maybe the 80s. So you might have noticed, I mean, you probably didn't, but if you get an email from me, you won't find any contractions. Why is that? Well, you don't write them if you're writing for publication. At least we didn't. It's starting to come in a little bit more. I try to write something, may not do it today, but I try to write something every single day. So, and I take seriously the form. So I don't. If you get an email from me, it's likely to have more than one paragraph. I try to think about even a short thing, how you would shape it. So you got to think like a writer. In other words, you start practicing the habits that make this happen. Runners can't eat certain things, they have to train certain ways, and so forth. So I put on a set of things that make me think like a writer. I don't text. I don't do Facebook, in part because I'm a private person, and the people, you Google my name or you use some other search, you'll find me. People have found me So I don't need to be found by everyone. But mainly, I don't think I can say much in 140 characters, and I'm not asked to do that much. So maybe in the future we'll have extraordinary persons in literature from that. I don't know. I've got enough to do, so I don't do that. So again, I'm going to take writing seriously. I try very hard to never write an incomplete sentence. If I'm going to use passive voice, there's got to be a reason for it, and so forth. I'm trying to keep the rules of writing when I write, and then I want to write something every day to practice my craft. And I want to read what I feel like cross-training good writers, German commentators in translation, not good models. You've read them, haven't you? I'm trying to say. I was trying to sound like Von Rad translated by, it's write good, clear English prose. If you can write a 5-paragraph essay that's clear and solid, you can write a book. Understand what you're trying to do with words. Be careful. Same thing when you preach. Are these good words? Is it an effective speech? Will you stand by them? Have you told and seen the truth? So start thinking like a writer. Practice the habits that go along with it. Take advice from people who actually mark your paper. I was very discouraged about a year ago I make lots of marks on paper, and I mean, if the professor writing on your page freaks you out, you wouldn't want me to grade it. So, but I'm actually in dialogue. But then you realize a lot of people are only looking for the end, B-. So I started giving the comments back to doctoral students at one point where I didn't give them the grade. Drove Mooney nuts. But at any rate, to look at the marks. So I was about to quit doing that about a year ago. I get a letter, an email from a student I had in 1994 who's now teaching her daughter to write in homeschool and thanked me for all the marks that I put on the paper. She had pulled it out of the file and read it. Again, God's a funny person. So when someone gives you constructive criticism, not were you drunk when you wrote this? But here's a better way to say it. Listen and take it on board. And I still submit my stuff to other people. A friend of mine who is Ben Mitchell, who's a provost at Union University, he's going to be speaking on something. He sent me a draft and asked me what I thought. So listen to people, take constructive criticism, learn the habits of writing if you want to be a writer.
Okay. All right. Very good. I want to ask you a question about genre when you are writing, because like I mentioned before, you have written different kinds of things. And so, for instance, your recent book on Bonhoeffer's seminary vision is very different. It's a different topic, I suppose. I don't know if it's a different genre per se, but it's a different topic, of course. But specifically in terms of commentary, what is it like writing a commentary, and how is that different than writing a sort of just more of a sustained narrative?
To write a commentary is you'll ask a question that you should ask all the time. What's the audience? What's the target audience? And I've heard lots of writers criticized for writing what the editors wanted them to write and what the series called for, and the reader saying, I didn't do this, didn't do that. They did what they were asking paid to do. So you might want to go ahead and read those series prefaces before you criticize some of these things and see what they were asked to do. I then think about what would be a normal reader, a good reader. So, for instance, New American Commentary, they said to me, or even when I wrote Old Testament Survey, Trent Butler was my editor, maybe the best Old Testament scholar Southern Baptists really ever had, as far as tremendous guy, tremendous editor, tremendous scholar. Mm-hmm. He said, I want you to think about people assume no knowledge really, an 18-year-old or an 80-year-old, it wouldn't matter. They're beginning students. Imagine that. Some of them I had in my class at Taylor University and that sort of thing. Don't dumb it down. Write to a real person. He suggested I write shorter sentences, and this was the aim. So I got the audience, and I think, at least for a while, I think we had it right. Then I was going to do the New American Commentary. It's different. I was writing to basically 18-year-old students and the kind of people I was meeting in church who didn't know the Old Testament. Nothing wrong with their minds. They just no experience.
That was the survey.
Yeah. And then the New American Commentary is supposed to be theological exegesis. We're still trying to figure out what that is 25 years later. But Trent said to me then, well, you better figure out a grid that you're going to work on. And so I said, okay, we're going to go here, 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 and here. So these are the sections. We're going to start with whatever historical details need to be known to help you understand literary material, theological, canonical, down and through to applications. This text is flowing like that. And I was thinking about pastors and students who in good faith would try to teach this. At the time, I hadn't written commentary. I probably would have signed on to do anything. Opportunity matters, but I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that reader, that's those students. I wanted to write. They told me how, and it's very important. I'm still learning this, but I think I have learned it. To work on this Isaiah commentary, I will never take another book contract that doesn't give a word limit. This was how many pages they would give me. So I then began to scope. It's like your dissertation. Here's how many pages you have. So I started planning out the book. I wanted to talk about the people in 1st, 2nd Kings if they were real people, and to keep the unity of the thing going. But still, once I determined what I thought was the overall shape of the book, like I was trying to do that today imperfectly, but here's what I think Isaiah is doing. This is the way he's doing it. These are the people in it. This is the way, the images that are going. And this is how we keep reading to, if you wanted to read it from first to last, you could. So a commentary, you're thinking about a different kind of reader than if it's a survey. If the editor and the publisher can't tell you who they got in mind, then I would do it if I hadn't published before, and this helped my gig. But I'd have to pick somebody and say it in the preface.
Yeah, who the audience is.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because we want the masses to buy this. What everybody wants. So there's that. The Word Biblical Commentary. My PhD supervisor John Watts edited that. Here was already the format. So then my question is, what's my own personal contribution to this? What do I bring to this particular task that is unique and understandable? Bonhoeffer was the first book I had written in a long time that I didn't already have a contract for. It's a great blessing to have a contract, but there was a part of me that wanted to feel like a writer again, if I could put it that way. So Bonhoeffer had 35 years of impact on me. I've been reading his stuff. A lot of things came together. I wrote it without a contract, went to publishers with it, learned to risk rejection again, which it was rejected by 2 people, didn't fit their program, and so forth. But I wanted to write from the heart about something that hadn't been covered the last half of his seminary teaching years. And I worried, though, that I didn't know enough history. I was greatly relieved when Victoria Barnett, who's the American editor of the series, told me she thought I'd done good work.
Good.
So it was a great relief, but that was a risk to me, but it's one I wanted to take because, again, I felt like a writer again.
Yeah.
And not someone who was plotting out books that I was asked to do or something. But the plotting out is good work. And I'm incredibly blessed to say, never write with a contract. What are you, nuts? If you can get a contract, write the book. But it was different.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to kind of segue into another time here where Amy Whitfield's going to come up and sort of lead our second half, and then we'll try to leave about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for other questions. And I hope I have this information right. I didn't check this with you beforehand, but I remember a comment that you made one day when I was in your office and at Southern Seminary, and I was asking you about writing, and I think I was just working under the assumption that I was working at my computer. I was working a certain way, and I asked you something about how you know, the writing process, and I still remember you doing you were doing your pen in the air, and I said, "What do you mean?" And you said, "I write everything longhand." I may be paraphrasing, and you could point down on your shelf, if I remember correctly. There's my Old Testament theology, you know, and it was a series of notebooks. There's my King's commentary, and it was a series of notebooks. I hope I'm remembering this right. What to you, and I haven't asked this of you before, so I'm curious to hear, and it may just be a very silly answer, I don't know. Is it important to you that you're writing by hand? What do you gain in that experience, or what happens to your writing that's different than if you were writing at a computer?
That's interesting you ask, because I'd been writing on a computer for quite a long time, and then recently I've gone back to writing by hand. First of all, I learned to write by hand. I never learned to type, really. I have learned to type the way a lot of you have. I mean, to me, typing is this real thing, you know, where you got the system down. Not where is it? You know, I'll hit it. But when I first learned to use a computer, my goal was to be able simply to type more words a minute than I could write.
Mm-hmm.
But I find these days I get too sloppy and think I can revise.
Yeah.
I get these wordy answers. You ought to see how wordy I get on the computer. Slows me down. I have to invest in each page. I have to ask myself if I really want to say that. Do I want to? I can't go back and fix all this without an effort. My sentences start coming into line. It becomes more of a physical act and not just a... It's going to always be a mental act, but I went to I think the last place in the United States where they make the whole book from typeset to gluing it together and putting the type on it. And there is something about slowing down, having the physical process involved. If your hand hurts, you've probably been writing too hard or too long, and so forth.
Yeah.
So it changes my style to a simpler, more readable, more judicious, if I could put it that way. For years I wrote, someone else typed it, I edited the pages, and we were just about done.
Yeah.
So I notice more younger people now carrying around, you know, the moleskin books and the things and writing things down. You might better ask them, because they're coming from the other side. Why would I give up, you know?
Right.
But writing's a physical act, I think.
Yeah.
I'm glad I don't have to mix the ink, but
I think that's what I've discovered, and I was talking to someone else about this. The best things that I write are done by hand, and the fastest things I write, I suppose, are done on the computer. Yeah. Or there's maybe other ways to say that. But there's something about the physical act, and I think it's the technology of having just that single point. And it's your sort of my mental focus has been reduced to one point.
Yeah.
Rather than 10 fingers and a separate keyboard and then a separate yet printer somewhere else. And it's bringing that whole process into just one point in time and space.
Yeah, and see, since I switched, now back, I'm writing on a desk, and I'm looking outside at our property. I don't have much property, but I really enjoy it out there, what I see. When I'm on the screen, what I see is the screen. So when I look down, I see a keyboard. When I look up, I see a screen. Now when I look, and I know you can put a window, you can sit in a different spot, but just for me personally, it's changed my horizon and the refreshment I get writing.
All right. With this, I'm going to turn this over to Amy.
All right, so we'll make a little bit of a transition. You've been talking about you as a writer, so now we're talking about another writer having impact on you. How this will help frame where we go. How many of you are readers of Wendell Berry? Okay, so we have a few. So maybe you can give a little bit of an introduction to him, sort of the impact, why we would pick one writer to really talk about.
Yeah, and I will strive to be briefer. Students often say, I have a brief question. I'm always fearful I don't have a brief answer. Wendell Berry is born in 1934 in Kentucky. He's still alive, still writing and working. He was born in a rural context. As he said, thought he would be educated to leave there and inhabit a career, not a place. With the attempt to be famous, probably in an academic setting that would cause you to move every 2 or 3 years. 1964, he's offered a teaching job at the University of Kentucky, and he made the firm decision to leave New York City, where he's teaching at Columbia, to go to the University of Kentucky to live in a place. And he has taught off and on, now off, and written in his home place. Of very few American authors write essays, fiction, and poetry. It's a small group, but he does that. And by now, the body of work is extensive. He's best known for arguing that American industrial thought is not inevitable nor good, necessarily, and that we should consider places and people and words more carefully. I started reading him sometime in the late 1980s, I think, because I was a rural person, he was a rural writer, and have come slowly to appreciate more and more. I served as president of the Evangelical Theological Society. I was given a job of speaking at the national meeting, in which we had creation care as a theme, and I started examining what my life had been in its reflection of rural people. I read The Unsettling of America, and then I understood nearly everything that happened to us. And I was so angry at what had happened through our culture. I was so angry at my people's part in participating in what had happened to us that I had to pick something else, but to speak about. But it's been an education all the way along.
So you talk about as he's talked about sort of the development of things. One of the things he deals with a lot is technology. And I'm going to show my hand here a little bit. So I read him, I track with him talking about sort of the damage that has done to community. I have a 12-year-old who asks me every day about some other social media tool that she wants to use, and I get to always say, well, no one's allowed to do that till they're 13, so that's kind of my thing. Next year, I don't know what my answer will start to be, because I want to keep that from sort of taking over her world, our world. At the same time, I work in communications here, and social media is a huge thing for us, we know. So in some ways, a lot of people here, can barely remember a time when it wasn't like it is. The places they're going to go and the people they're going to minister to are going to be in this. How do we find the balance, and how do you take what he's bringing up about community but actually go into a real context where we can't change everything now?
Yeah, I think the most fundamental question he would ask is this a tool you're using for a good end, or are you the tool now? Does it own you? I know tool now has come to mean something else these days. But I was asked to contribute to a journal, and that was what they had on the front. The phone was telling the owner of the phone, "You're my tool. I'm not your tool." You also should say, am I using this to relate to other people? I think is the most fundamental question. Who I relate to personally, because two things. One, if a student goes out today to minister to a church, they need to remember, I'm the young end of the baby boom. Not everybody is spending all the time on this. You're going to have lots of parishioners who are people too. They're just old. They are, by the way, old people are the main buyers of ebooks. A lot easier to carry. You can make them big for your eyes, all sorts of things. Very interesting what we're finding. So it's one thing for me to say I love a telephone because I can keep in contact with my wife today, or I could keep in contact with a friend. But having lived a long time, do I need a cell phone? I only feel bad for the people picking me up at the airport. Having been to the Soviet Union back and not found the people on the other end that I was expecting, I pretty well figure I can do this without a cell phone, maybe. Maybe. So that's one thing I can say. It's one thing if I carry this thing because I love a telephone because I can talk to my dad. Long time. I can get email from friends in Australia and Africa in the same day. But that's a tool of our relationship. It doesn't replace it. And I think, so on the one end, you got people who are used to relating face-to-face and using technological devices to help aid that. And then you also have, the first studies of Generation Z are very interesting. That'd be the ones in high school and early college now. That they're coming to say there's no big deal to some of these things, how to relate to people. So it's another way to say, how can I be different than my older brother? Well, I'm not on all that stuff. I go see my friends. I'm a rebel. So I don't know what the next generation, I don't know that everybody will be doing
everything. Yeah.
So, but I do know this, they will expect you not to Skype in when their wife dies and you got the funeral. They're going to expect you there will always be this human expectation, and I think it's very, very important for us to remember it's part of how we're created. So does the tool, and frankly, what's it cost? Is any cost bearable simply because we could think to buy it? So, I mean, Berry now, he still has not bought a computer, famous 1987 essay he wrote. But he now knows that whatever he writes is going to be fed into a computer and printed out. He knows that some of the people who do his correspondence use that. We're part of a technological culture. Some of it's part of the second fall of the human race, he says. There's part of it. We're contributing to the coal company right about now with these lights on and stuff. That bothers him, but it's part of it. So what do? We try to manage ourselves. And I guess as a Christian, I would also ask a third question. If self-control continues to be a gift of the Holy Spirit, what does that mean for technology? What does it mean for anything? It's still part of it.
Yep. So you said you started reading him because you're a rural person. I read him because I grew up on my grandfather's tobacco farm. He died when I was young. Before he died, he had to sell off a lot of the pieces of land to take care of my grandmother. And I have one cousin. All the grandchildren have gone off doing different careers. I have one cousin who is systematically trying to buy everything back that he possibly can and farm it. And when I read Wendell Berry, I feel like I'm talking to my grandfather again. But not everyone's from that background, and not everyone's headed to that background. So we've had this sort of new move back to the urban centers. And one of the things we see around here, and we talk about around here, is urban church planting. We have a lot of students who are headed back to the cities. And one of the things that's said all the time is the cities are the cultural centers. They're kind of the thing that trickles down to the rest of society. So why should someone who is urban read Wendell Berry? What does that have to contribute to what they're doing?
Yeah, first of all, I think I've been rereading Berry's book on William Carlos Williams, and William Carlos Williams was an urban poet that Berry respected greatly. Berry is a poet of place, not a poet of only rural places. So what he respected about William Carlos Williams is that he spent decades of his life in this urban place, knowing the people there, serving the people there, investing in their lives cross-generationally, and that sort of thing. So I think that's what he values. Do you come to make a difference and to make this home and to make it better while you're there, or did you come to excavate it and go on? So I think it's beyond farming. It's beyond the critique of get big or get out until there's nobody left in the country. And it is startling, I have to say, Stephen, to go back to Grant County or even the environs, Blackford County, where I used to live, and to see how the emptying of the land has accelerated since I lived there 20 years ago. Death of whole towns and cultures and all sorts of things, and so that does matter. But beyond that, Barry, I think would say, where are you investing where you are? Mm-hmm. How are you doing that? Are you paying attention to the people, the places? As for the urban being these are the influencers, so that's where we need to go. I love his book, The Way of Ignorance, and Life is a Miracle. Let me tell you what you don't know. You don't know whether you're going to influence the influencers, and you sure don't know if that's where the influence is going to come from. Why do you not know that? Because you are not omniscient. So, if you only go where you think they're going to influence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what do you say to a person who serves in a, what do you say to the faithful people serving a rural church or a good small town church or what? They're losers? We're going to trump them? God called them and sent them and gifted them and put them there. That's where they belong. So, I have a hard time thinking we know all that we think we know, or that we've influenced all we think we've influenced. Mm-hmm. Not only that, if we influence culture, I think Barry would say, you influence local culture. Because culture is an abstract concept that doesn't really work. New York City, where my friend Greg Thornberry's president of a college, he doesn't talk about New York. He talks about Manhattan and his part of Manhattan. Peggy Noonan, who's a New Yorker through it, she talks about where she's from. So your local culture is what you can impact. The rest of it, better walk the way of ignorance and mystery. We'll see what happens.
All right, I have two more questions and then we'll open it up. One, we talk a lot about Great Commission here, which everybody does, but that's been a big thing. We use the word go everywhere. And a lot of times when we're talking so much about where we're headed and going out, it has this very transient feeling. Like I'm just headed down this path. But a theme all the way throughout, particularly in fiction from Berry, is this sense of place and this understanding of the importance of place. So how, when we're talking about going to the ends of the earth or going across the street or wherever, what does place have connection? The rootedness to the place where you've come, connecting with the place where you're going, that type of concept.
Yeah, it's inevitable the way our culture's set up, the way education's set up, and that sort of thing, that there will be 2 and 3 and 4 year stints in your life. But do you actually unpack your stuff? Care about the people who live here and who will live here, invest in their lives and learning from them, and care about this local place for as long as you're here. It's really a matter of concentration, isn't it? I'm going to be here. I want to invest here. I was proud of my daughter when she immigrated to England because I think she learned the lesson. She didn't go and stay in an American, only with talk with Americans, stay with American group, do anything else. She started meeting English people, British people. She got invested in the local church, in the local area. This is how I became the sponsor of a legal alien eventually, her husband. But at the end of the day, she was trying to invest where she was, the way she had in Grant County and Blackford County when she was growing up, and try to make a difference. And she's made long-term friends from that investment locally. So at the very least, invest in one another so you can know each other long-term, but also do something about investing in Crescent Hill if you're in Louisville or whatever you call the town here. So do you ever do anything besides with people like yourself? So you go to class here, you go to a church here that's all your people and people like you, and you've never spent $1 or done a thing in the locals. I guess you keep remembering their people too. So invest is what I would say. Even if it's a short period of time, unpack the stuff and get in it.
Okay. All right. I'm going to ask a double question to finish out, and then first of all, there were people here who haven't read Berry. So where do they start? And then second, I'm going to throw this one at you. I didn't mention this before, but you've mentioned Wallace Stegner a couple of times today, which has been I've been loving that, and we're focusing on Berry. But who are other authors that you would recommend in the same sort of vein? So where would you start with Berry, and then who else would you?
If you want to start with Berry's fiction, I would start with A Place on Earth, which is a novel. Has a great scene, for instance, lots of great scenes that are helpful pastorally. That was some of what my paper was at ETS here. But there's this one part where a young minister's trying to help a family who's lost a loved one in World War II. And he really wants to help, but he keeps talking in platitudes, and the narrator says, for this young man, the word never became flesh. He couldn't quite get with the people and their hurt where they were. So that was helpful. But that introduces you to all the major Berry characters, and then there are other novels that go with it. If you're going to read his poetry, and again, his seminary community, his Sabbath poems, which now are collected over a long period of time. I actually brought with me and thought I would bring it to this meeting and forgot. Sabbath Poems 2006, in which he really reflects on the land, family, and the future, in which he says things like he can't quite figure out what the resurrection will be like, the new heavens and the earth, but he makes this beautiful statement. I want to know my wife, see her young, and remember that I loved her when she was old. So you just start thinking about, in the new heavens and the earth, the implications of something like that. Or 2013 Sabbaths are beautiful. He has this one poem about how we disintegrate into disincarnation before screens if we're not careful. But he's going to make you think about the faith. So the Sabbath poems are good that way. Lots of other good stuff he's written, but I'm just saying as an entry point. Essays, you'd probably be helpful as I would on that. I love this one essay, if you go find it, Discipline and Hope, which says the means and the ends are interconnected. How we do things. So the how of education, the how of ministry, the how of parenting, the how of what, that you can't just say, well, as long as we got a good end, you don't know what you're looking at then. So Discipline and Hope's awfully good. Standing by Words is a good book and essay for ministers and others whose words are going to matter.
I like What Are People For?
What Are People For is a great book and a great little essay. It's a simple one. Education for Home Defense is a good one. Now, any of Berry's essays that are about his friends are very instructive. So if he's writing about Mari Tallene, or he's writing about some of these other authors, he's talking about his friends and why they're important to him, and it'll bolster your interest in friendship. On friendship, Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety ought to be required reading, probably for every human being, but certainly for everybody who wants to be a friend and a minister. Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. I hear they're going to make a movie, but
that book wrecked me. So.
It is exactly what I was trying to say when I wrote an essay on friendship and ministry. Exactly it, and it's true to life. He writes a lot of stuff that's directly from his life, and these are friends he had. Crossing to Safety, I think is brilliant. Stegner has a book of essays called Where the Bluebird how's it go, the Big Rock Candy Mart, Where the Bluebird Sings and the Lemonade. Anyway, it's taken from the song Big Rock Candy Mountain. But it's got, you librarians, he's got this great essay at the dedication of the University of Utah Library in 1969 or 70. It's a marvelous piece. He has a friend named Berry has a friend named Gene Logsdon, Logsdon. Gotten to know Gene a little bit. He was training to be a Catholic priest. And when you read how Gene came to confront the absurdities of religion in preparation for ministry and how he came to not believe, it should help all of us who are educators to think, theological educators to think about how this is going with people. But Gene Logsdon also writes about how you grow things at home, how you raise cattle and sheep, and he's got great memoirs. So Gene Logsdon, I'll make sure he knows that I recommend him to a bunch of seminarians. Gene takes some sort of perverse pleasure in knowing that, but it's been interesting to get to know him.